Welcome to the Equity Guru video interview. Today I'm talking to Ian Paterson of Plurilock. That would be PLUR on the ticker symbol. Ian, for those that don't know, how would you summarize the business opportunity with Plurilock?
Plurilock is a cybersecurity company. We started as a software manufacturer. We make artificial intelligence software that allows us to identify people based on their unique behavior. And recently just made a fairly large acquisition, acquired a solutions provider called Aurora. And so now Plurilock is a solutions provider for workforce authentication. And so we're in the multi-billion or multi-trillion-dollar cybersecurity industry, depending on how you calculate it.
So I always found it really interesting the way that your company engages in demonstrating the security of the person using a computer. If you could just go into a little bit of detail on that.
Yeah, so Plurilock has some technology that allows us to identify people, specifically employees, based on how they interact with devices. So quite literally, the way that you type on a keyboard and the way that you move a mouse can uniquely identify you as a person. So the field of study is called behavioral biometrics. And as a result of our patented technology, we've bundled this into effectively an authentication security product. So customers historically have been US Department of Defense, banks, financial institutions, that sort of thing. Organizations that need a higher level of security to defend against the type of attacks that we're seeing today.
So for the layman, I guess we're used to typing in a password and a login, but your system is basically looking at, like, how does the person normally work? I know that I usually have 150 tabs open, and they're all very specific things. So that would be a fingerprint in and of itself. But also, style of typing, style of using the mouse, anything else on top of that?
So those are exactly the types of indicators that we're looking at. We actually call them micro expressions. So think of the speed, rhythm, and cadence of how your fingers tap the keyboard. I mean, that is informed by everything from the style of typing that you do, the length of finger that you have, the muscle memory that you have. There's micro expressions built into that behavior, which is what we're looking at. I think the key difference, though, in what we're doing as compared to traditional authentication is that most traditional authentication happens once, maybe twice per day. It's when you first get started in the morning, you sit down, you type in a login and password, and then by and large, there's not any additional checks throughout the day. And so what Plurilock is doing is we're checking 250 to 300 times per day, invisibly in the background, without the employee having to do anything extra during their workday.
Got it. So obviously, network security is at a pretty important point of its existence right now. Lots of cyber hacking going on, lots of ransomware, pipelines being shut down. People hoarding gas in plastic bags. It's all gone very weird.
Yes.
How scalable is your product to be able to actually get to not just government, but also corporations, and maybe even to scale it out to personal use?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we're focused right now on mid-market regulated industries. So think government, financial institutions, critical infrastructure. So power definitely would fit into there. And we're focused on protecting the employees of those organizations. So perfect target for us would be, organization in the hundreds to tens of thousands of employees in size. Now, the great thing is that because our solution uses artificial intelligence, we're actually a form of automation that the business can use. So one of the statistics just come out recently for 2021 is that there's over 3.5 million cybersecurity jobs unfilled. So we have negative unemployment in the industry. Last year, it was 1 million jobs left unfilled. So the problem is getting worse, not better. Now the answer to that is, look, if you don't have enough people in your bank or in your power plant to do the security work that you need, your only other option is that you have to get smarter tools. And using AI as effectively an additional layer or a level of automation that can run even if the people are doing other things is critical to being able to protect against the types of threats that we're seeing. So that's really why technology like Plurilock that leverages artificial intelligence and machine learning is so critical in today's environment.
So we're certainly seeing a lot of big money going into computer security in the markets, and Palantir obviously being a namely. But on the smaller side of things, when you're working with large corporations, Fortune 500s, military, government, it can often take a lot for the smaller companies to penetrate. Do you think you've cleared that hurdle?
Well, I think it's a double-edged sword. I mean, on the one hand, there's perhaps less awareness of the smaller companies. On the other hand, and this is actually something that we hear from our customers, there's a preference to work with smaller companies like Plurilock because frankly, the customers have direct access to the executives, right? That's not always the case. If you're only a 20,000 person financial institution, it's unlikely you're going to have access to the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. And so actually working with a firm like Plurilock is seen as an advantage. So that's the first part of the answer. I think the second part of the answer, though, is that with this key acquisition that we made just about a month and a half ago now of Aurora Systems, we acquired that company largely because they had existing master service agreements or what's called contracting vehicles with both state and federal government. And so it gives us a distribution angle that's effectively already pre-approved to be able to sell to those larger state and federal organizations. So, I don't think that we're penalized necessarily for being a smaller company. In fact, we really promote the fact that we are, we're very focused on creating value for customers and being much more accessible than perhaps a larger company might be.
Got it. With the technology that can still do the job in the same way.
Well, or hopefully do the same job with less people. I mean, one of the key use cases for us is that in a lot of cases, the entry-level cybersecurity staff are typically, they start in a security operations center, what's called a SOC. And those SOC analysts are the people who look at alerts on a daily basis. And it's just alert after alert after alert. Now, the challenge is you have to be very skilled and knowledgeable to know which alert is one to look at versus one of the thousands that you should just ignore. And so again, because we're using automation and AI, we're actually helping to enable those junior people to be able to say, look, this is an alert that you really need to pay attention to. Maybe it was an antivirus or a data loss prevention alert that gets triggered. But then if you look at Plurilock and say, look, was it the right authorized person on that device at that time? And if Plurilock says, no, probably not, well, now you have a problem. And you've just enabled a junior employee to be much more efficient and be able to deal with a lot more data coming at them. And so ultimately, it's a huge efficiency story within the enterprise.
Got it. And look, you put out news that you're filing a prospectus to raise up to $50 million. Like, that's a significant bump. Assuming that money gets raised, what's the use of proceeds?
So largely it's acquisition. I mean, we've stated that our growth strategy is twofold. One, both organically, we hired a number of sales folks early in the year. We'd certainly be delighted to go and do more of that in the future. But I think the second is that cybersecurity is a very fragmented market, and we see that there's tremendous opportunity to grow inorganically through acquisition. We've already shown that we can complete transactions. So we acquired Aurora at the end of March. And the great thing about cyber, because it's so fragmented, there's lots of opportunities to acquire and roll up other, what I'll call ecosystem participants. So they may not be software providers like us. They may be systems integrators, solutions providers. They may have professional services organizations. But what they do have is great distribution and great access to customers. And so the value proposition for us is to acquire those entities, leverage those sales channels, cross-sell our high-margin software products through those sales channels, and that's how we hope to realize value creation. And the prospectus that we put out is largely in pursuit of that strategy.
Got it. So less R&D, more picking up the D that's already been done.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the D in this case would be distribution, right? The development is certainly something that we do in-house. We're very proud of the data scientists and development expertise that we have internally. The technology really started as a result of 35,000 hours of true fundamental research, millions of dollars of investment that had gone into the core tech. Now it's time to realize that. Of course, with software, you're never done, right? You never hit complete. You're always continuing to invest there. But that's the strength that we started with. And now it's time to scale and add distribution to the story.
One thing I find really interesting about network security is how often things get into the tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars worth of development that can be undone by a guy with a screwdriver and a credit card. You know, how much red teaming happens at the other side of the development for you to sort of take it back to brass tacks and say, okay, this works in theory, but does it work when a guy's parked outside?
Well, so it's a good point. I mean, you use the term red team. I think that that's part of a security testing framework. So red teaming traditionally is you give your software to somebody else and say, try and break it.
Right.
And generally the best possible outcome is they'll say, well, this is going to be hard. It's never actually impossible. With enough time and money, you can get into anything. By the way, it's the same thing for physical security. If you look at traditional locks or safes, there's nothing that's impervious to attack, but it's measured in time. And so the highest grade locks and safes are measured in how long it's going to take a determined attacker to actually break in. Well, with software, it's very similar. With enough time and money and expertise, you can get into anything. But the trick is how easy or difficult are you going to make that? So that's the first part. So the second part is with enough defense, with enough software and policies and procedures and people in place, you can make it very, very difficult and very slow for the adversaries to actually get in. Now that time is the time that the good guys have to recognize there's been an intrusion, stop them from moving laterally throughout the network, and then ultimately booting them out. So that's the goal, right? You shouldn't think of cyber defense as preventing them from getting in. They're always going to get in. The trick is to be able to recognize that and boot them out. Now, when it comes to our software, absolutely red teaming and doing penetration tests is part of the software development. I think also because what we have is very new and innovative, we also spent a long time doing peer review of our research. So it's not just the technology, but it's actually the underlying fundamental algorithms. Are they sound? Have they been peer reviewed? And in our case, yes. I mean, we've been published in over 100 journal articles, received thousands of citations. And so that's an important part as well. And then I think the last part, which is something that I say a lot, is that cybersecurity is a team sport. There's no one product or even service that's going to keep a company safe. Plurilock is designed to solve a very specific problem, which is identifying whether it's the right authorized person on the device continuously. We're not tackling malware. We're not tackling ransomware. We're not tackling phishing. Now we help mitigate all of those things, just because if we can solve a point of access, maybe the other things don't occur. But the critical part here with any cyber defense is making sure you have the full breadth of solution and what's called defense in depth to be able to defend against attackers.
Got it. So your most recent news release, you did a deal with the U.S. Department of Defense. I would imagine that people, generally speaking, they're used to many millions, tens of millions of dollars worth of contracts when the Department of Defense is raised. I'm assuming that the contracts that you've signed are starting points. That if all goes well, once you pass that gate, there's a lot of work to be had.
Well, so you're absolutely correct. I mean, if you just look at the federal government in the United States alone, and you forget about the state and local, I mean, that is a market unto itself, right? In addition to all of the commercial entities within the United States and North America broadly, it is a massive opportunity. I mean, what we saw just recently is that the Biden administration it looks like is going to announce billions of dollars of IT spend. This was from a Bloomberg article today that cited documents that hadn't actually been released yet. But there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there. Now, the interesting thing is that when you're selling to the government and the U.S. federal government in particular, is that it's not actually one customer. You're selling to multiple agencies. You're selling to multiple commands. At the state level, you're selling to potentially 174 California state agencies, right? And so these are, the government is a market, and then within that you have multiple constituencies and multiple customers. Now, part of the value of the Aurora transaction that we acquired in March was that not only do they have these contracts, these master service agreements or contracting vehicles with which we can more easily do procurements, but they also have past performance. And so whenever you're bidding on a project, whether it's commercial or federal or state or local, it's always helpful to be able to say, look, we've done a similar project. Obviously, we haven't done this exact project, but we've done a similar project in the past. And so having that capability, both to be able to say, look, we're a trusted vendor, we have a history of being able to deliver on what we say we do, but also potentially the expertise of the professional services engineers. They might have certifications, they might have done a similar data loss prevention deployment at another agency. So all of those things contribute to the likelihood of success. And to your point, it's incremental, right? You do one deal, you do another deal, you do another deal, and then they build, and eventually that expertise translates both into reputation, but also the actual milestones that you can point to say, look, here's the last 3 projects that we've done. Don't take our word for it. Go talk to go talk to them.
I guess one of the struggles you might have is that when your system works really well, no one's talking about it publicly. It's the kind of thing that someone quietly gets escorted from the building and maybe sent to an institution. But you don't get to put a news release out saying, "Hey, we saved the day over at Nuclear Power Plant 3."
That is correct, and in fact, even beyond that, most of the time, customers don't even want to tell the world that they're a customer. Because if you can obscure what your defenses are, you've denied the enemy the ability to do reconnaissance, and so that is challenging. On the commercial side, especially, there's quite a culture of not being able to name customers, and kind of the more sensitive you get, and particularly if you're being brought in as a result of a large data breach, you don't want to broadcast that. So that's a challenge. I think, again, the federal business that we have has actually been very beneficial, because we've been able to say publicly that Department of Homeland Security, DHS, we're on our 3rd contract with them, right? And so they've been a terrific partner to be able to just disclose that and say, look, here's public procurement records. You can see DHS was actually gracious enough that they did a press release as well saying, look, we're working with Plurilock. So, it is challenging in the industry overall. I think that there are some things that you can do to say, yeah, we've been around, or even we announced a renewal of a contract earlier this year. So we didn't cite who the customer was, but it was a financial institution. And we were able to point to the fact that they renewed a contract.
So I guess one of the interesting things about being a security provider is you've got to watch your own security. We've seen recently large companies in the space being penetrated and used as a Trojan horse, basically, to get past not only their own defenses but others. How much effort do you have to put into locking things down on your end?
Considerable. We always assume that we are subject to the same, if not more, attacked. We're subject to the same or greater risk than even our customers. There has been a history, particularly over the last couple of years, of bad actors going after service providers to access their downstream customers. The most recent example is SolarWinds, which was just massive earlier this year. But even before that, there have been active campaigns going after those service providers. So it's something that we at Plurilock take very seriously. And it's also, it provides us yet another proving ground, right? So we not only use our own software, but we also use as much of the software as our customers do as possible. So, we want to gain expertise, and we want to try and experiment and test and kind of see where are the shortfalls in our own environments before, being able to do that with the customers.
Got it. So one last thing I think is a question that I have is, when you're taking so much data from your users in terms of the AI side of things, does that present a problem in terms of storage and high performance computing power on your side? Is that where your large amount of costs will go?
So it's a good question. And what's interesting about what we're doing is it's a very constrained data problem. So just by way of example, I've spent the last 10 years solving problems with data across a number of different industries. Plurilock is actually functionally the same business that I've been doing for the last 10 years. The difference is that rather than answering questions around e-commerce or market research using data, we're answering security questions. And functionally, the question that we're answering is, are you the right person on the device continuously throughout the day? Yes, no, maybe, and then you kind of go from there. The way in which we do that is predetermined. In other words, we know exactly what data we want to collect. It's actually a very narrow slice of data. We're only looking at effectively the time and behavior of a user. We don't care what website you go to. We don't care what application you're in or what you're typing on the device. In fact, we don't even care what language you're typing on the keyboard if you're typing anything at all. One of our solutions engineers always has a joke during the demo that he does to say, look, this is me at work. This is me playing Call of Duty, later in the night. And then you see the behavior of those two applications. But because we're only looking at a very narrow set of data, it gives us a couple of benefits. The first is it's actually very privacy compliant relative to even a security camera in a bank, right? That's just looking everywhere. You also might be familiar with those security cameras that point down at the keyboard or at the cash register, right? In comparison, we're only looking at your behavior, and so as a result, it's a little bit easier to talk about and to say, look, in comparison to these other invasive technologies, we're not going to do that. So that's the first part, privacy. Second is that it's actually a lot less computationally intensive than other security solutions. So, going back to your question, what do we do internally? Well, we've been testing a number of endpoint security solutions, antivirus, anti-malware, et cetera, because we've been doing a bake-off to see which one are we going to use on a go-forward basis. And what we found is that some of these pieces of software really slowed down our devices. Like 30% of our CPU and memory was being utilized by this software. In comparison, Plurilock generally is less than 1% CPU and network, which is actually a very surprising thing because, like yourself, most of our customers start off thinking, well, this is going to be very intensive, and they're pleasantly surprised when it's not. So kind of a long answer to your question, but absolutely, like Plurilock has been surprisingly efficient at all levels, and as a result, it's been good. It's been a good feature for us to talk about.
What is the one thing that you fear as being the CEO of a network security company?
Well, I mean, the obvious one is that we are going to get attacked. I think that the other fear is that if there is something at a macro level, either that affects the public markets, because we're now public, and so we have all those risks as well, or something geopolitical, right? We did see just over the last couple of years, we saw some decisions being made about foreign-owned networking gear like Huawei, being cut off of certain markets. We saw sort of the same thing with Kaspersky a couple of years ago, which was another antivirus product. I don't think that something like that is going to happen tomorrow, but it certainly it presents an element of geopolitical risk and market risk that may not exist if we were in another industry doing ad tech or using data for some other reason. So it's something to be concerned about. On the other hand, I think because of all those risks is also the reason why the industry is so large. The estimate right now is that there's going to be $1 trillion of cybersecurity spending over the next 5 years. And so it's a massive market and a massive opportunity. Yes, does come with some risks, but there's both pro and con to effectively the same thing.
One of the issues that I think has hit computer security companies recently has been the good guy v bad guy scenario. I think there are good guys and bad guys politically, but there are also good guys and bad guys perceptionally. Companies that do business with ICE, as an example, being hauled up by shareholders and onlookers. Is there ever a discussion internally, or has there been to this point where you say, you know what, maybe we steer clear of these guys because they're just a little too close to the wrong side of where we want to be?
Um, yes, there definitely has been a lot of thought and discussion around what type of company that we want to be. It also has to do with where do we want the technology used or not used. And we've always taken the approach that as long as we are operating in an environment and with a constituency where everybody involved would see this as a net positive, then we're doing the right thing. You know, I wouldn't want to be in a situation where the technology is used offensively. I'm not even sure exactly how that would occur necessarily, but you know, we're trying to, our guiding light is to be customer obsessed and ultimately create value and solve problems for customers. And so as long as we're doing that and the people that we're solving the problems for are the same people that are using the software, then we're generally going to be in a good spot. I think the other distinction, though, is that a lot of the controversy that I saw over the last couple of years with ICE that you mentioned was perhaps non-cybersecurity companies that were singled out because they were just doing general technology, and there wasn't an acknowledgement that look, we might work with organizations that are on the front lines of whether that's public safety or DoD, et cetera. I think because Plurilock starts as a cybersecurity company first and foremost, there's almost an expectation that, yeah, we of course we're going to be used in areas of the highest risk. I mean, by definition, that's who we should be serving. Sure. So I think because that was always transparent going in, we've been able to navigate those conversations pretty well.
Well, look, in terms of your first year or so on the markets, I think you've managed to do really well. Company's clearly growing. The good thing about those government contracts is they get paid on time. It's a beautiful thing to know the money's actually going to come in at the end of the month. Rate yourself out of 10, if you would, for how you've come along so far.
Yeah, I would say 7. I'd say 7 out of 10. You know, I think if I were to look back, I mean, we've only been listed for about 9 months, so let's not round up quite yet. What we said we were going to do is we said we were going to get public, we were going to capitalize the company, and we were going to grow both organically and inorganically. And I'm quite pleased that we've been able to execute on that. We successfully raised $5 million, just over $5 million in February. We successfully completed our first acquisition. We successfully grew our sales force, and we've been landing contracts all the way through. And so by every measure, we've accomplished our objectives. I think, I never actually want to hit our goals. I always want to set those goals larger than we actually can hit, because if we hit our goals, then we've just been too conservative in setting those goals. Yes. So I'm always striving both for myself and for our team to keep pushing and keep going harder and farther. And that's what we're going to continue to do.
Is there one thing you wish the markets would understand a little bit better about your company?
It's a good question. I think that because cybersecurity is so large and there's so many different facets, they're all important, or at least most of them are important. They may have differing degrees of importance, but by and large, you need something for email security. You need to be able to prevent the phishing links that come in. You also need something to prevent ransomware, and you need something to prevent what happens if somebody steals your password and tries to impersonate you. Well, we can help with that. But, the important part is that it's not to say that a Plurilock solution is necessarily better or worse than a anti-malware solution. They're solving different problems, and both problems are important, and both problems actually contribute or can relate to one another. So, you might start with an attack. Somebody has your password and logs into your account, and then they deploy malware. Well, you could have stopped it one of two ways. You could have prevented them from getting in the first place, or you could have prevented them from deploying that malware. It's not binary. It's not one or the other. And so I think the confusion comes when you say, look, we're a cybersecurity company, and therefore you're able to stack rank against other cybersecurity companies, when in fact, really you should be looking at this as a basket. Cybersecurity is so large, you need multiple solutions. I think the one, so broadly, that's what I would say. I think the one clarification is, yes, there are multiple cybersecurity companies out there. The difference is that Plurilock is still very early in its journey. And I think that what I hear from investors quite a lot is that most cybersecurity companies start and operate privately going down the VC road for many, many years and only go public once they're at the multi-billion-dollar stage.
Right.
Whereas Plurilock, I think, is one of the few stories that I'm aware of that is an earlier small cap staged opportunity. And so it does provide an opportunity for investors who are looking for something that is cybersecurity related, understanding that we're in the identity space, we don't do email security, et cetera. But as long as you have those caveats that there's kind of understanding of our place within the overall ecosystem, then Plurilock could be a great opportunity.
Is there a consumer product out there on the horizon somewhere?
Look, absolutely. There's a ton of opportunity. I mean, I think even for Plurilock's core product today, we don't really do much for small business. We kind of start at that mid-market, a couple hundred employees up to thousands of employees, tens of thousands of employees. And then we also are not as focused right now on the 100,000 employee plus. So there's an enterprise, and then there's an SMB, and then there's an individual markets, all three of which we're not really targeting right now. And that's okay. There's plenty of opportunity in the future to scale up, to scale down, to go into adjacent verticals. I mean, again, that's the beauty of cybersecurity. It's such a large market that there's all kinds of opportunity to go after. And
you've got a pretty significant moat around your technology that allows you the luxury of being able to grow as you like.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've got 3 issued patents. We've announced that we've applied for 3 additional patents this spring. We've kind of announced them as we've gone. So we believe that there's a long future in the technology. We're continuing to invest in it, and we're building for the long term. When we build with a 5-year vision in mind, and that's just how we try and operate internally as part of our decision making process.
5-year vision on the public markets. That's a crazy thing. Usually used to 4 months.
I don't know what to tell you.
Well, look, at a time when a lot of sectors in the market are really taking a dump, and a lot of people are pulling their money out and playing with crypto and whatnot, your share price continues to slowly march forward, which I think is a testament to what you're doing, testament to how you're getting the word out, and as those government contracts add digits to themselves, then I think you're onto something good. And as you say, it really is a rare thing for a company like this in this space that has an actual defensible technology to come out so early on at a price where everyone can make money. So we're used to the Palantirs of the world coming out with many multi-billions of dollars so that the VCs can exit. We're not so used to being the VCs ourselves. So credit to you, and good job so far.
Oh, I appreciate it, Chris. I hope to be back, later this year or next, and tell you about all the other exciting things that we'll accomplish by that point.
That'd be fantastic. Appreciate it, man. PLUR is the ticker symbol. Plurilock is the company. Get to it.